Price itu 64.
Mahal mo.
Pero malagad ang ano. Good evening, everyone. We'll be starting in 5 minutes. Just a notice that if you have any raffle tickets or you want to buy raffle tickets, they're just in the back on the table next to the sound desk. Yeah, please get your raffle tickets if you haven't got any so far.
இன்னும் ஒரு சில நிமிடங்களில் தமிழர் தகவல் மையம் நடத்த இருக்கின்ற மனித உரிமைகள் நாளுக்கான விழா ஏற்பாடுகள் மிக விரைவில் சிறப்பாக நடந்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றது. அனைவரும் உங்களுடைய இருக்கைகளில் அமர்ந்து கொண்டால் நிகழ்ச்சிகளை தொடங்க உதவியாக இருக்கும் என்று நம்புகின்றோம். அதே வேளையில் உங்களுடைய ரஃபல் டிக்கெட்ஸ் உங்களுக்காக காத்திருக்கின்றது. அந்த டிக்கெட்ஸுகளை நீங்கள் வரும்போதே பெற்றுக்கொண்டீர்கள் என்று சொன்னால் அதை இலகுவாக நடைமுறைப்படுத்திக் கொள்ள இலகுவாக இருக்கும். உங்களுடைய பெயர்களை பதிவு செய்தவர்கள் தயவு செய்து இருக்கைகளில் அமருமாறு அன்போடு கேட்டுக்கொள்கின்றோம்.
Corona, corona kana, like இன்னைக்கு அப்பப்போ செலவுடைய மிக்கவங்க அதுக்கு அதை நான் ஐநோ எக்ஸ்ட்ரா நான் பொசிஷன் எடுக்கிறதுக்கு தான் எங்கே ரைட் பொசிஷன் டேக் audience if I stay there I wanted to and it's live so I can get it you can create human rights. Yeah. Money. In the side come on, camera live. Oh. No, okay.
Hello.
Hi everyone. Sarva. Hi everyone. Welcome to you all. Before we start the event, can you please kindly stand up, everyone, and observe 1 minute silence in remembrance of all those who lost their lives in Sri Lanka and throughout the world in conflicts, and as a mark of respect to everyone else who has suffered as a result of these conflicts, and to honor the memories of those who have struggled to promote human rights, peace and justice in the world. 1 minute silence, please. Thank you. On behalf of the Tamil Information Center, it is great pleasure to welcome you all and meet you, all who you are dedicated to promoting and protecting human rights in Sri Lanka, which is Ilangai for the Tamil-speaking people. As you all probably know, 2019 is the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This year, we mark the Human Rights Day during the crucial UN conference in Madrid to uphold climate justice. This has been a year of tremendous activism, especially by young people. We owe our gratitude to all those millions of children, teenagers, young adults and others who have been standing up and speaking more loudly than ever before about the crisis facing our planet. With this climate theme in our mind, we can action standing up for human rights by celebrating the potential of youth as constructive agents for change, amplify their voices, and engage a broad range of global audiences in the promotion and protection of human rights.
enlighten us about how our rights are the foundation for sustainable development and peaceful societies. It acknowledges the advocates and the defenders of human rights around the world. Coming back to our event, it is also my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our chief guest, Mayor Roxana Fayez, who will be with us around 6:30, and also Mr. Stephen Timms, who is the East Ham MP, around 7 o'clock. Also our performers and presenters. The Tamil Information Centre celebrates the Human Rights Day each year to remind us of the suffering and loss of lives that accompany the struggle of human rights in Sri Lanka and the world over. It is a day to remind us that peoples of Sri Lanka and the other countries who have been subjected to oppression should never be denied their human rights. The day is also meant to remind us that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the common standard to which every country must aspire, and we appeal to the Sri Lankan government to remain committed to upholding the values and goals proclaimed in this declaration. Human rights and human dignity are at the heart of all aspects of human life, and the Tamil Information Centre pledges to continue its task of promoting and protecting human rights, particularly in Sri Lanka, and continue to work in cooperation with national and international human rights organizations. While we continue to urge the Sri Lankan government to respect the rights of individuals and help them to reach their full potential, we are fully aware that we must work to ensure human rights are for all people in all places and at all times. We have also set this day aside to remember individuals who have contributed substantially to the promotion and protection of human rights in Sri Lanka. It is also a day for the human rights activists and the community to meet and enjoy it with dance and music for whatever they enjoy as their rights according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was created by the United Nations in 1948. We hope you all enjoy the event and continue to support the cause of Tamil Information Centre. Now I welcome Sabina, member of our younger generation, to introduce the event today. We also welcome Rajita San. She is the IBC presenter who will introduce the program in Tamil. Yeah? Thank you.
நன்றி ரமணியக்கா. மிக அழகாக மனிதநேயம் விரும்பிகள் எல்லோரும் என்று மனித உரிமைகள் நாளுக்காக என்று தமிழர் தகவல் நடுவம் ஒழுங்கு செய்திருக்கின்ற இந்த நிகழ்வில் கலந்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றீர்கள். மகிழ்ச்சியோடு பல நிகழ்வுகள் உங்களுக்காக காத்திருக்கின்றன.
Thank you, Romney Auntie, for your welcome speech to our TIC's Human Rights Day. And yeah, we've got a very extensive program that we're going to be having today, so yeah, ready to get started.
நாங்கள் ஆரம்பிக்கும் முகமாக நிகழ்வை ஆரம்பிக்கும் முகமாக வரவேற்பு பாடல் நடனத்துக்கு முன்பாக தமிழ் தாய் வாழ்த்து பாடல், தமிழை நேசித்து தமிழுக்காக தம் இன்னுயிர்களையும் வழங்கியவர்கள் நிறைய எங்கள் சமூகத்தில் இருக்கின்றார்கள். தமிழ் தாய்க்கு ஒரு வாழ்த்து கூறி என்னுடைய நிகழ்வுகளை ஆரம்பிக்கலாம்.
So we're going to start with the Tamil Thai Vanakkam. So it's a prayer to Mother Tamil, and the prayer will be sung by Vasantha Kumari, Lalita Ruby and Ranika.
வசந்தகுமாரி, லலித ரூபி, ராணிதா அவர்களை தமிழ் தாய் வாழ்த்தை வழங்க அன்போடு அழைக்கின்றோம். குழுவினருக்கு எங்களுடைய மனமார்ந்த நன்றிகள்.
Thank you for that beautiful rendition of the LONDON-KARAI Balagam.
நாங்கள் இந்த நிகழ்வை ஆரம்பிக்கும் முதலாக சில அறிவித்தல்களை உங்களுக்கு கூறிக்கொண்டு நாங்கள் நிகழ்ச்சிகளை தொடர்ந்து நடத்தலாம் இருக்கிறேன். உங்களுக்கான டாய்லெட் வசதிகள் இந்த மண்டபத்துக்கு பின்புறமாக அமைந்திருக்கின்றன. அதேவேளையில் கேன்டீன் உங்களுக்காக தயாராக இருக்கின்றது. நினைக்கிறேன் இடங்களில் இருந்தால் உங்கள் கேன்டீனுக்கு நீங்கள் செல்லலாம். நிகழ்ச்சிகளை முழுமையாக இருந்து பங்கு பெற்றதோடு ஆதரவு தருவீர்கள் என்று நம்புகின்றோம்.
So in terms of housekeeping, the toilets, you can either go through either door, and there's some in the back, there's some downstairs as well, and the canteen is through on your left-hand side, your right-hand side, sorry, and that is, if you pop by during the break, try and enjoy the performances whilst they're going on.
எல்லாரும் இறுக்கமாக இருக்கிறீங்க போல இருக்கு. மனித உரிமைகள், மனித நேயங்களோட சிரிச்சு கொண்டிருக்கணும். எங்களுடைய உரிமைகள், எங்களுக்கான உரிமைகள் எது என்று தெரிந்து கொண்டு அந்த சந்தோஷத்தோடு அந்த உரிமைகளுடைய நினைவினாலே நாங்கள் நினைவு வருவதற்கு உற்சாகமாக பல அனுபவங்களோடு மனித உரிமைகள் சார் செயற்பாட்டாளர்களாக அது தொடர்பாக ஆய்வு செய்தவர்களாக பல உரைகள் உங்களுக்காக தன்னுடைய அனுபவங்களோடு சேர்ந்து பகிர்ந்து கொள்ள இருக்கின்றார்கள். அதற்கிடையில் நாங்கள் இந்த நிகழ்ச்சியை மகிழ்வோடு ஆரம்பிக்கும் மூலமாக வரவேற்பு நடனத்தை நாங்கள் இப்போ அழைக்கலாம் என்று இருக்கின்றேன்.
So we're going to start with a welcome dance, and so to perform the dance we would like to invite Subram Sudhavaran and Abhinaya Ramachandran to come to the stage.
விஷ்ணு கௌதவத்தை வழங்க சுப்ரம் சுதாகரன் மற்றும் அபிநயா ராமச்சந்திரன் அவர்களை அன்போடு அழைக்கின்றோம். வரவேற்பு நடனமாக விஷ்ணு கௌதம் வழங்கிய சுப்ரம் சுதாகர் அவர்களுக்கு என்னுடைய மனமார்ந்த நன்றிகள்.
Thank you to Subram Subhagan for that beautiful dance in praise of Lord Vishnu.
அடுத்ததாக நாங்கள் மிகவும் முக்கியமான ஒரு நபர், லண்டன் தமிழர் தகவல் நடுவத்தினுடைய மிக முக்கியமானவர் திரு வரதகுமார் அவர்களை நாங்கள் என்றும் நெஞ்சோடு தாங்கியவர்களாக மனித உரிமைகள் நினைவு நாளை என்று சிறப்பாக கொண்டாடிக்கொண்டிருக்கின்றார்கள். அவருடைய நினைவு கூறலை அடுத்ததாக நாங்கள் பார்க்க இருக்கின்றோம். இந்த லண்டன் தமிழர் தகவல் நடுவத்தின் ஸ்தாபகர்கள் ஒருவராகவும் அதை தொடர்ச்சியாக இயங்கு நிலையில் வைத்திருந்த ஒருவராகவும் மனித உரிமை செயற்பாட்டாளராக தமிழர்களுடைய உணர்வுகள் உரிமைகள் தொடர்பான தொடர்ச்சியான செயற்பாட்டாளராக என்றும் இடைவிடாத கடமை உணர்வோடு தன்னை முழுமையாக ஒப்புக் கொடுத்தவராக திரு வரதகுமார் இருந்திருப்பதை நாங்கள் எல்லோரும் நன்கு அறிவோம். அவருடைய ஆளுமை, பேராளுமை எங்கள் இனத்தினுடைய தமிழ் இனத்தினுடைய பிரச்சனையை இங்கு வாழும் புலம்பெயர் தேசத்தில் அனைத்து இனங்களிடையே கொண்டு செல்வதற்கு அவருடைய பங்களிப்பு மிக முக்கியமாக இருந்திருக்கிறது. அவரை பற்றிய ஒரு காணொலியை நினைவஞ்சலியாக இப்பொழுது காட்டியிருக்கின்றார்கள்.
Next we will be doing a tribute to Mr. Radhakumar. As many of you know, Mr. Radhakumar passed away on 13th of March this year. He was the Executive Secretary of GIC. His sudden death devastated all of us who worked with him. This is the first Human Rights Day event that we have done without him. Being a committed human rights activist himself, we would like to take this opportunity to say a few words about Radhakumar, and we're going to be showing a short clip prepared by volunteers and a speech. We'd like to invite to the stage Mr. Sabes, Subina Sabes, an artist, photographer and volunteer at TIC, and he'll say a few words about Radhakumar.
சுகுண சபேசன் அவர்கள் எல்லோருக்கும் மிகவும் தெரிந்த கலைத்துவமிக்க புகைப்பட கலைஞர். இந்த காணொலியை காட்டுவதற்கு முன்பதாக அவருடைய சிறிய உரையை நாங்கள் இப்பொழுது கேட்கிறோம்.
The video will run with some sound at the beginning, and then it'll go silent. Then at that time I'll start speaking. Mani, who is standing there, help me put together this video. That's Mani, please.
The 9 o'clock news.
The communal violence in Sri Lanka is continuing and has apparently become more widespread.
Tamil groups in London have been following events in Sri Lanka with rising anxiety. Their information centre in South London is trying to cope with calls from Tamils worried about relatives caught up in the violence. The Tamils expect many more of their community to become refugees.
Recently we have been informed that there are about 55,000 refugees and they are in a desperate situation with regard to the food supply, and they have asked us whether we could help them.
What do the Tamils want?
The Tamils want a separate state, and they feel that they will be secure if they have been given a place in their homelands, that is northern and eastern province of Sri Lanka.
Can you tell me first of all, why are people so desperate that they'll go to the extremes of forging papers and taking their chances?
Well, first, if you look at the situation in Sri Lanka, the violence has increased tremendously during the last few days. In Ukadichur, in the eastern province, about 2,000 troops mounted a massive operation in Sri Lanka, killing more than 200 people. We have evidence to show. Usually, people, Tamils who have been arrested are tortured. And these people, if we allow them to go back, certainly they will be arrested. And they will have to undergo torture in Sri Lanka. And we will internationally, we will actually how Sneaker. And Ruben will liaise between Rubenraj and Shankari.
Kumar has been the executive officer of Tamil Information Center from its inception to his sudden death in March this year. There is his presence in words, deeds, and thoughts in everything of TIC. He was a simple man with rich ways of building resistance against oppression. In the short time I have, I would like to focus on the legacy he has left behind and what we can learn from him. As I speak, you can see the video running behind me. It reflects different projects of TIC. I understand Bharata's idea as human rights work by looking at how he worked with others. We understand his character and processes by considering all these in the context of the political, psychological, and physical turmoil through which that Tamil people have lived. We will understand what he means to us, human rights practice, and lessons for our own activities. Bharata had a holistic approach for human rights. Everything that affects life was equally important to him. His practice addressed social dignity, political and legal rights, and moral imperatives of human rights. He worked with lawyers in 2002 challenging the UK Race Relations Act, leading to change in legislation on the treatment of asylum seekers. He developed the Center for Community Development, through which a range of community organizations were undertaken. Community programs were undertaken. Schools, health development, mental health, elders development, elders empowerment, integration of former fighters into community, and exercise classes in London. Reach and research and lobbying about arms trade. Campaigning about Prevention of Terrorism Act, which has been in place in Sri Lanka for a long time. Organized human rights training for police force of the Tamil de facto state in Ireland. He organized meetings between different groups of liberation struggle. Encouraged volunteers to develop the War Widows Project. Supported publication of several books on heritage, resistance, history, and poetry. There are numerous examples like this to mention. The character and method of Bharata becomes clear when we see his work. He builds networks, carefully cultivates relationships, taps into people's resources, skills, specialities, and interests, works as a facilitator, works as a mentor, helps individual researchers, projects, and volunteers develop skills and confidence. Bharata urged volunteers to develop an ambitious exhibition and museum project to mark the resistance and heritage of Tamils. He listens, lets you talk, puts you in touch with people with whom his extensive network, with whom he can work. I asked him, what's the budget for the exhibition? He said, we don't have a budget, but this is the idea. And we have to make the people own the project. And a successful exhibition was launched this year. I asked him, how much space can you give me for the art exhibition that he asked me to do? He asked how much space you want. He did not have a limit. He did not have restrictions. Let 1,000 flowers bloom was his motto and mode of operation. He's of my age, a few days younger, but I'm still learning by thinking of this short encounter with him. I'm learning about him through others who have been working with him. I'm learning by reflecting on the exhibition project which he started but did not see. He told me that when he was in Sri Lanka in December 2018, to the surprise of the army officers, he offered to facilitate a mediation between Sinhalese and Tamil farmers. He then told me, meeting with a VIP of the Sri Lankan state, telling that the constitution reform is not going to do anything for Tamils unless there is a fundamental change of heart on the side of the Sri Lankan state. What he means to us. Varada needs to be studied and reflected upon. He is a mysterious well of wealth and knowledge. He allowed your ideas to grow, you to grow, made you feel important, gave the opportunity to find your own space, strengths to develop. I think I'm right in saying that Tamil Information Center is the only organization where different generations of the diaspora work together. This is one of Varada's greatest achievements. In his long vision for the struggle becomes clear. It also should be marked that he embraced a range of artists, researchers, media people from other communities. I asked him why Tamils of Lanka and not Tamils of Ireland or Tamil of Sri Lanka for the exhibition title. He said Lanka means Ireland, so there's no problem there. The Sri, the prefix Sri, is the Sri Lankan, the Sri prefix in Sri Lanka is the oppressive chauvinistic term. Therefore, Tamils of Lanka is an appropriate expression. You leave him thinking about the meeting. This is the sign of a man whose meeting enriches you, makes you aspire to emulate his calmness, confidence, clarity, unwavering vision for human rights of Tamils. He built connections, solidarity. The model of today's meeting is his model of human rights work, solidarity, dignity, determination, self-determination. There are people for whom we remember for what they have done. Then there are people from whom we learned even after their passing. We remember Varada for both. I conclude with what Rachel Sodi wrote in his obituary. Varada Kumar was a mystery and an archive. He never spoke about himself or sought recognition for his work. Now that he's gone, we'll share our stories and start to build a true picture of the extent of his contribution to Tamil rights in the UK, Ilangai, and worldwide. My sense is that it will astound us all. Thank you.
மிக ஆழமாக தன்னுடைய மனப்பதிவை வரதகுமார் தொடர்பான தன்னுடைய மனப்பதிவை உங்களோடு பகிர்ந்திருந்தார். அவருடைய பணியை தொடர்வதற்கு எல்லோரும் கைகோர்த்து பயணிப்பதும் மகிழ்ச்சிக்குரிய ஒரு விடயமாக இருக்கின்றது. திரு சுகுண சபீசன் அவர்களுக்கு எங்களுடைய மனமார்ந்த நன்றிகள்.
Thank you for your speech, Thomas. It really captures how much Radhakumar has done for the Tamil community and what a sense of loss that we all feel without him with us today.
எங்களுடைய பேச்சாளர்கள் தொடர்ச்சியாக வருகை தந்து கொண்டிருக்கிறார்கள். அவர்களுடைய பேச்சுக்களை கேட்க நாங்கள் தயாராக இருக்கின்ற அதே வேளையில் இப்பொழுது மனித உரிமைகள் தொடர்பாக மனித நேயம் பற்றி பேசுவதற்கும் எப்போது நான் தாய் வீடு போக முடியும் என்ற ஒரு கவிதையை தர சோவாஸ் பல்கலைக்கழகத்தின் தமிழ் சமூகத்தினுடைய தலைவி வித்யா நந்தகுமார் அவர்களை அன்போடு அழைக்கின்றோம்.
Next we invite Vidya Nandakumar, who is president of SOAS University Tamil Society, to recite a poem titled When Can I Go Home?
போவோம் தாய் வீடு போக முடியுமாங்களா? பார்க்கலாம் வாருங்கள்.
When can I go home? My home is not where I am called a savage, where my skin is viewed unclean, for they laughed and laughed at my culture, thinking they could colonize me. The empire's collapse didn't bring me solace, nor did it take me home. Instead, new people forced their way in, claiming it to be the lion's home. My home was then burnt, and my Anna had told me to hide. I heard Anna screaming, but she was not in the house alive. The lions had caught her, bare with their teeth. They wore a badge with the lion's flag, and all she wore was defeat. But Anna had told me not to fear, that we didn't need to flee, that Pax would be our savior, as non-violence was our means. I asked Anna then, when can I go home? He stood there silent, a date unknown. Everything became broken. My hopes, my dreams, the pacts. I stood there looking at Anna and Akka, who had now taken a vow. A vow to protect our land, to make our people free. Safety, security, and liberation, so that I could finally sleep. I slept for many years, with tigers guarding my home, till the West began helping the lions, and the lions began to erase. It was upon the deadly seas, where the West once was. I asked them to please look at me, and I asked them, when can I go home? They responded with silence, and turned a blind eye. Democracy, liberation, and freedom, hope began to become shy. It was upon the beaches of Milibai, where I thought there was no hope. I looked upon the TV screens, a refugee with no home. Days became weeks, months, and then years. Their desperate plea to recognize our atrocities were mute to international ears. So I asked you, the listener, when can I go home? To a place where there was real freedom, to a place that I know, where I can finally sleep, where the tigers guard my home, where I didn't have to fear walking at night, where I can finally call home.
மிக்க நன்றி. நாங்கள் எப்பொழுது வீட்டுக்கு போக முடியும் என்ற தாய் வீடு போக முடியும் என்ற கவலையோடு தன்னுடைய கவிதைகளை பகிர்ந்திருந்தார். எல்லோருக்கும் தாய் நாடு எப்பொழுதும் உணர்வோடும் உயிரோடும் உணர்வுகளோடும் ஒட்டி இருக்கின்ற ஒரு விடயம். அந்த தாய் வீடு தொடர்பான தாய் நாடு தொடர்பான உரிமைகளுக்காகத்தான் தொடர்ச்சியாக பல இனம் பல வகையில் தங்களுடைய போராட்டங்களை நடத்தி கொண்டிருக்கின்றார்கள். மிக்க நன்றி வித்யா, உங்களுடைய அழகான கவிதைக்கு.
Thank you, Vidya, for your beautiful poem. I think, a lot of people can probably feel the same kind of emotions that were brought up in the poem about your homeland and your attachment to your homeland. So thank you very much for that.
அடுத்ததாக நாங்கள் உரைகளை கேட்பதற்கு முன்பதாக இன்னும் ஒரு நடனத்தை அழைக்கலாம் இருக்கின்றோம். தாண்டவ கோத்தரம் மேனன் கேஷேஸ்வரா டான்ஸ் கம்பெனியினுடைய நடனத்திலிருந்து அமைப்பிலிருந்து நடனத்தை வழங்க மேனன் அவர்களை அன்போடு இடைக்கு அழைக்கின்றோம்.
So next we're going to have another dance by Swara and it's called Dandava Kottram, and it's by the... Thank you.
மேனன் அவர்கள் ஆயத்தமாக இருப்பார்கள் நினைக்கின்றேன்.
பாங்குடன் பரமனின் முகத்தனில் இனிலை உள்ளிலை இனிலை என பேச பறைகளும் திமிலையும் ரசம் இசைப்பாட விண்ணவர் வாழ்த்திட வேதம் முழங்கியது மன்னவரார்த்திடம் நாதம் பரவியது பன்னிசை பாடிய பல பல முனிவர்கள் எண்ணிலாயெழில் என் பெருமானை திரிபுர நெறித்த விழிகளில் கருணை பொங்க பரிபுரந்தரித்த பாதங்களை தூக்கி விரிசடை விரித்தோம் விடையேறி அமர்ந்தோம் கயிறை உரித்தோம் கயிறை உரித்தோம் கரினை உரித்தோர் கழித்தாட விடைந்தார். ஓம் நம சிவாய. தத்துவம் தத்துவம்
பணியும் முறையும் கையிலை மலையும் பணியும் முனிவர் நிறையும் சபையில் இதயம் கவரும் வகையில் இறைவன் உலகம் நீயும் வகையில் அருள கரியினை முடித்தவன் காமனை எரித்தவன் காலனை உடைத்தவன் கரிநட புரிந்தனன் ஒன்றும் கடல் பாதத்தில் எந்தில் இசையாக ஜம் ஜம் லயதாரத்தில் நல்கும் ஒன்றும் அவர்க்கும் துன்பம் தலை அழிக்கும் அன்பார்கள் நாவேதம் வரை நாதாய் கூதம் தலை ஐந்தாய் காதங்களாய் நின்றாய் பாதியும் அந்தமான சோழி
அழகான நடனத்தை தந்த நீங்கள் அவர்களுக்கு எங்களுடைய நன்றிகள். கலைகளை கற்கவும் கலைகளை மற்றவர்களுக்காக நடனம் ஆடவும் கூட உரிமை இருக்கின்ற அதே வேளையில் கலைகளை பார்த்து ரசிக்கவும் கலைகளுக்கான பாராட்டுகளை ஊக்குவிக்க தெரிவிப்பதற்கான உரிமை உங்களுக்கு இருக்கின்றது. மீண்டும் அவருக்கு உங்களுடைய
Thank you so much for that mesmerizing start. I'm going to stop using the word beautiful because I keep using beautiful. And I'm going to pronounce the name of the dance right this time, and it's LONDON-KARAI. And yeah, so thank you very much.
அடுத்ததாக நாங்கள் முதலாவது பேச்சாளரை நாங்கள் மேடைக்கு அழைக்க இருக்கின்றோம். மிக முக்கியமானவர், இனப்படுகொலை தொடர்பாக பல ஆய்வுகளை செய்தவர், பேராசிரியர் மவுசானி. நான் சரியாக உச்சரித்திருக்கிறேன் என்று நினைக்கின்றேன் அவருடைய பெயரை. பர்மிய நாட்டினுடைய கல்வியலாளரும் ஆய்வாளரும் மனித உரிமைகள் செயற்பாட்டாளராகவும் தொடர்ச்சியாக பல ஆய்வுகளையும் ஆவணப்படுத்தல்களையும் மேற்கொண்டவர்களுடைய அந்த பேச்சுரை மிகவும் முக்கியமாக இருக்க போகின்றது. இலங்கையிலும் கம்போடியாவிலும் நடைபெற்ற இனப்படுகொலைகளின் ஒற்றுமை மற்றும் தீர்வுக்கான வழி என்ற தலைப்பில் இன்று உரையாற்ற இருக்கின்றார். இனப்படுகொலை தொடர்பாக பல இன மக்கள் பலவிதமான பிரச்சனைகளை சந்தித்துக் கொண்டிருக்கிறவர்களில் ரோஹிங்கியா மியான்மர் ரோஹிங்கியா மக்களுடைய பிரச்சனை தொடர்பாகவும் நீண்ட ஆய்வுகளையும் தொடர்ச்சியாக அவர்களுக்கான குரல் கொடுத்து வருபவராக இருக்கின்றார் பேராசிரியர் மாவுசாயி. அவருடைய பேச்சு உரையை கேட்க அவரை அன்போடு விலக்கி அழைக்கின்றோம்.
So next we've got one of our guest speakers, Dr. Zani. Dr. Zani is a Burmese scholar, educator and human rights activist. He's co-authored a number of books on the genocide of Myanmar's Rohingya. He is a co-founder of Forces of Renewal South Asia and a fellow at the Genocide Documentation Center, Cambodia. He'll talk in particular about the judges at the People's Permanent Tribunal on Sri Lanka. And he will talk on the topic, parallels between the genocides in Sri Lanka and Cambodia and ways forward in seeking justice. Everyone give a warm welcome to Dr. Zani.
Good evening. Before I say anything, I want to ask all of us to observe 1 minute silence, because we cannot talk about human rights without honoring and remembering the people, human rights defenders, innocent children, women, men, elderly people, wherever they may be, whatever their religious, ethnic, national identity, who have paid with their lives for something that we are trying to celebrate and advance. So just 1 minute to think of anyone who has been, or any community who has been harmed.
Thank you.
I'm very honored to be invited to share my thoughts on genocides that took place in Cambodia and the genocide that is taking place as we gather today in my country of birth, Burma, or now known as Myanmar. As many of you will probably notice in the media, online or on television, that one-time human rights icon and 1991 Nobel Peace Prize laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, the woman who made her home, who made Britain her home for over 2 decades, mothered 2 British and Burmese children, educated in this country, widely held as the Nelson Mandela of Asia. Just last week in The Hague, she stood at the podium as Madame Agent, defending the indefensible, denying, dismissing the country's ongoing genocide of 4 decades against Rohingya Muslim community that has been part of our country since its birth in 1948 at the end of the Second World War. I was there in The Hague at the ICT, not at the gallery where she and other important individuals where I was with a few Rohingya activists, Burmese monks and others who are on the other side of the equation, supporting Aung San Suu Kyi. But we were sitting in the same room, a small courtroom, where we were given a huge flat screen to watch. We could, during the coffee break, we could see the people like Aung San Suu Kyi and the Gambia Legal Council diplomats coming over for coffee, but we were on this side. What I want to talk about is this. Human rights is not simply a principle on paper. As you know, in 1948, December 10th, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. And that document was supposed to be the guiding human value statement. 3 years after the closure of Auschwitz in early 1945. And that document remains, for many states and governments, something that they pay lip service to. And that includes 5 guardians of our post-Second World War world order. 5 permanent members of the Security Council. These are member states, leading member states, that have been entrusted with the task to ensure that peace, stability prevails in the world since the Holocaust ended. Paradoxically, to me personally, most outrageously, these are also the world's largest merchants of debt. They produce the largest quantities of arms, and they market, they sell what they produce to any country that will pay. That includes Saudi Arabia, that includes my own country of Myanmar, that includes Sri Lanka, which has brutally ended politically motivated military conflict in Sri Lanka. In 2013, I was one of the 11 members of the panel of jury that for about a week combed through piles of documents pertaining to what Elam Tamil people have done to resist the internally colonial state of Sri Lanka. And in December 2013, 11 of us, I was the only and youngest member of the panel among very distinguished group of people from around the world, including genocide scholars, lawyers, people who co-founded the World Social Forum and whatnot, legal scholars. We found that the predominantly Buddhist state of Sri Lanka that has been in the hands of Sinhalese Buddhist nationalists have commissioned the crime of genocide against Elam Tamil people. It's one thing fighting terrorism. It's another thing destroying entire communities. Mass raping women and girls. Killing surrendered fighters. Extrajudicial killings. So I know that a lot of Elam Tamil supporters and members of the Tamil community wanted the recognition. What they suffer is not simply war crimes. What they suffer is a full-fledged genocidal policy at the hands of Sri Lankan government. I was raised a Buddhist. I am Burmese Buddhist. I came from a traditional Buddhist family in the old town, the last capital of our country, the old Burmese kingdom, known as Mandalay. Some of you old enough to know the poem by Rudyard Kipling, On the Road to Mandalay. He wrote the poem having never set his foot in my hometown. But nevertheless, as a Burmese Buddhist, I see a parallel between what the Tamil, predominantly Hindu people, suffer at the hands of Sri Lanka and the predominantly Buddhist state and Buddhist Sinhalese society, and what the Rohingya Muslims have been suffering over the last 4 decades in Western Burma, immediately next to the predominantly Muslim state of Bangladesh. So my family has served in the Burmese Armed Forces since its inception in 1942 under the fascist patronage of Japanese naval intelligence. The army was created with the support of popular Burmese public, with the popular support of the Burmese, who longed to expel, either peacefully or by armed struggle, the British colonial rule that had been in the country by 1942, over 100 years. And yet, the very same army became the sole instrument of genocide. And here, I want to say a word about genocide. When people use the word genocide, non-genocide scholars, journalists, other professionals, credentialed classes, doctors, engineers, teachers, and general public, we come to think of, or we immediately think of Nazi Germany and the genocide, the Auschwitz. At Auschwitz, some of the gas chambers or crematoriums, they were burning or incinerating gas victims, about 2,000 every 25 minutes. So of course at Auschwitz, almost 1 million majority Jewish victims, Roma, or in the old racist terminology, gypsies, several thousands of them, Sinti, Poles, Russians, they were all gassed. So we want to see the numbers. Lawyers would keep saying 10,000. I heard with my own ears just on Wednesday. The lead counsel for Burma or Myanmar, in the presence of Aung San Suu Kyi, the Canadian lawyer, a well-known genocide scholar by the name of William Shabazz, said 10,000 people. That was the figure that United Nations independent fact-finding mission came up with as the number of victims that were slaughtered in a span of several weeks. But we're talking about a genocide that my wife and I call the slow burning genocide. We published a 3-year study about 4 or 5 years before anyone called this a genocide. So we're talking about like 4 decades of institutionalized destruction of a particular group a population with their own distinct ethnic, cultural, linguistic, religious identity. I think the Tamil people also suffer a similar fate at the hands of Sri Lankan Sinhala state or government. One parallel that I noticed, if you're not Buddhist Burmese, which I am in my country, you are not. You may be entitled to nominal human rights and nominal equal citizenship, but you're not really a part of that national community. You are second class. I think a lot of Tamil people can relate to it, because in the old days, in the old pre-modern kingdoms, it was simply the power of the throne that decides or decided what privileges or what protections you're going to get. As long as you sold arms to a court of power in Asia, doesn't matter whether you're Portuguese or Dutch, you were given privileges. You were protected by the king. The king was interested in the preservation of his power. But fast forward post Second World War, or even before the colonial states, one thing that all colonial states have in common is a racially organized societies and political systems. The idea of minorities, in the most ironic sense, refer to the white colonial minority in the colonial context, where a few Oxford or Cambridge trained, or maybe Sorbonne trained, if it is a French colonial entity, they control a small minority, control a vast majority. That was a minority. And today, when we say minority, we're talking about national minorities that the United Nations considers protected groups. And so what we have in this post-World War II political order around the world is the legacy of colonial systems where race and ethnicity were fixed in stone, and communities were grouped along these reified entities we call like racial identity or ethnic identity. And so for many communities in places like Sri Lanka or in my own country, independence simply means release from the clutch of white men's colonial, racist, exploitative rule to the nationalist, brown men's similarly exploitative, similarly racist, similarly colonial rule. So that is why we see the rebellion from amongst the Tamil community. Wherever there is repression, oppression, exploitation, there will always be resistance. This is not rocket science. This is empirical history. Look about. We were not born to be enslaved or oppressed by anybody, whether a man or woman. So, how much time? 5 minutes. So what we have is post-independence, internally colonial states where dominant religious group, be they Theravada Buddhists, as in the case of Sri Lanka and Burma, or Hindu fundamentalists in the case of Modi's India today. As you're aware, because we are on the subject of genocide, forget the past for a moment. Forget what happened in Cambodia in the mid-1970s, where a third of the population was wiped out by this totalitarian, murderous communist regime led by Pol Pot. In our contemporary world today, there are textbook examples of genocides unfolding in my country. And there are also cases where, if you are students of genocide and mass atrocity, where you will recognize early phases or stages of genocide. In the case of Uyghur Muslims of Turkish origin in Central or close to Central Asia, in China, or in the case of Assamese Muslims, a few millions in northeast India, where Modi and his BJP fundamentalist governments that want to make India safe and prosperous only for Hindus. Assamese Muslims, about 2 million, have been struck off national registry on the pretext that they were really from former East Pakistan or today's Bangladesh that became independent in 1971 with the military intervention by the India's India government when West Pakistan brutally invaded their own national brother over linguistic nationalism, power sharing. And then in the case of Uyghurs, they have been in the news. We don't need to, go into detail. They've been in so-called re-education or vocational training camps where they cannot leave barbed wire camps under watch with surveillance or CCTV cameras, with guards standing over them with submachine guns. Genocide, I think the last word the last thought I want to share with you. Genocides are not simply about killing 1 million people at the rate of 2,000 per half an hour. Genocide simply means intentional attempt to destroy. The key word is destroy. We can be destroyed physically, as in our bodies, or mentally. Intentional attempt to wipe out, to destroy a human community that has its own ethnic, racial, religious, and national identity, either in whole or in part. You don't need to show that every single one of the Tamil community has been wiped out. Therefore, it is genocide. If you lost 100,000 families over the last 30 years as the direct result of the policies of Colombo, you are in the realm where it is no longer far-fetched to use the word genocide. So finally, on human rights and genocide, if you fight for human rights, genocides are considered the most heinous crime. And human rights is not simply something that we pay or policymakers pay lip service to. The truth is, only humans respect human rights. And so we need to ask the humanity, you need to question the humanity of those who run our world, when their policies and practices, whether corporations or governments or UN bodies like UNHCR, continue to trample on the most sacred principle that emerged out of this never again phenomenon. And we have seen and witnessed so many atrocities repeating themselves. And we must, as fellow humans, this is not a frivolous talk. Our primary identity is human, not Tamil, not Burmese, not Christian. We must band together because power is not about humanity. Power is about self-interest. Thank you.
பேராசிரியர் மவுசாய்க்கு எங்களுடைய மனமார்ந்த நன்றிகள். நீண்டதொரு உரையை இனப்படுகொலை தொடர்பாக இலங்கையோடு நிறையவே பரிச்சயம் மிக்க தன்னுடைய அனுபவங்களை எங்களுக்கு பகிர்ந்து கொண்டிருந்தார். இனப்படுகொலை தனியாக ஆண் பெண் சார்ந்து ஒரு முறையில் 1,00,000 மக்களை அழிப்பது அல்ல, தொடர்ச்சியாக திட்டமிட்டு அளிக்கப்படுகின்ற ஒரு விடயமாக ஒரு சமூகத்தை முற்றுமுழுதாக வரலாற்றிலிருந்து இல்லாத அழைத்து ஒரு விடயமாக அவர் முன்னிறுத்தி இருக்கின்றார். அவருக்கு என்னுடைய நன்றிகள்.
Thank you, Dr. Mamzani, particularly for your poignant note that you ended with. And yeah, the discussion between the parallels between the Burmese and the Sri Lankan situation, but also kind of royal parallels globally, and just kind of showing the need to stand in solidarity and really work together to combat these forces that are oppressing and continue to oppress citizens of the world.
நெக்ஸ்ட் நாங்கள் அடுத்ததாக மிக முக்கியமாக எங்களுடைய பிரதம விருந்தினர் இங்கே வருகை தந்திருக்கின்றார். அவருடைய தன்னுடைய நேரத்தை ஒதுக்கி எங்களுடைய நிகழ்வுக்காக அவர் வருகை தந்திருப்பதால் நாங்கள் தயவு செய்து இடைவேளை நேரத்தை நாங்கள் அவருடைய நேரமாக்கி நாங்கள் அவருக்கு மதிப்பளித்து அவரை செல்வதற்கான வழியை ஒழுங்கு செய்துவிட்டு தொடர்ச்சியாக எங்களுடைய இடைவேளையை நாங்கள் எடுத்துக்கொள்ளலாம். அதுக்கு எல்லோரும் நீங்கள் ஒத்துழைப்பீர்கள் என்ற நம்பிக்கையோடு உங்களுடைய தொலைபேசிகளை தயவு செய்து நீங்கள் சுவிட்ச் ஆஃப் பண்ணிட்டு இந்த உரைகளை கேட்டால் மிகவும் பலனுள்ளதாக பலன்மிக்கதாக பேசுபவர்களுக்கும் அவர்களுடைய கருத்துக்களை கேட்பதற்கு உகந்ததாக இருக்கும் என்ற நம்பிக்கையோடு எங்களுடைய அன்புக்குரிய பிரதம விருந்தினர் மதிப்புக்குரியவர் நியூஹாம் மேயர் ரோக்ஷானா ஃபியால்
So we're welcoming our first speaker guest, Mayor of Newark, Roxana Fires, who will be giving a short speech and then presenting the awards for the human rights defenders that we'll be honouring today.
அவருடைய உரையை தொடர்ந்து மனித உரிமைகளுக்காக செய்யப்பட்ட காப்பாளர்களுக்கான விருதுகளுக்கு உற்சாகமாக இருக்கிறது. அவருடைய உரையை இப்பொழுது நாங்கள் கேட்கலாம்.
Firstly, my deep thanks to the Tamil Information Centre for inviting me to join you to celebrate what is a significant event in marking the importance of human rights, reflecting on histories, elaborating on the lessons that we learn about conflicts all over the world, but in particular conflicts that dehumanise and marginalise significant communities in many states around the world. And I also wanted to commend Dr. Zani for your impassioned and powerful words on the basis of your, thank you very much, on the reflecting on your experiences as a human rights activist and the range of commentary that you provided. Was exceptional in terms of the insight that you bring to bear as an activist, as a practitioner, as someone who from the Buddhist faith is very mindful of the purpose and utility of religion, which should be anchored in that basic premise of our collective humanity and how that can be perverted in the intent to seize power and to maintain dominance against others. And I must commend you for your passion and your commitment as an activist on the human rights agenda, because I cannot imagine it was very easy to be both reflective and critical and illuminating on some of the actions and the heinous crimes that have been done in the faith that you embrace. And similarly, for those human rights activists who come from multiple faiths, but see from our countries of origin or countries of heritage some of the actions of state powers, state governments using state instruments to decimate, discriminate, alienate significant minority communities. I've been invited to just speak for a short while about the importance of marking the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, as mentioned, was signed on the 10th of December in 1948, following the horrors of the Second World War, which was illuminated through the intrepid interrogation and investigations of journalists and the armed forces who were leading the opposition against Hitler and Nazi Germany. And it's important that we continue to mark the International Human Rights Day, because human rights is not something that we have attained and the world is perfect. We know that we will live in an imperfect world. And as politicians, as policymakers, human rights must be an absolutely guiding principle of what we do as we govern, as we interact with our residents, with the electorate, with our communities. And it's that premise of human rights that has informed my social activism, which has informed my politics, and which has informed the promise that I gave the people of Newham when I stood to become the mayor of Newham last May. And I know that human rights also needs to be reflective of different contexts. The issues of human rights remain true and valid regardless of whether or not you live in the global north or the global south. And in the context of Newham, we have some 28,000 people living on our housing waiting list. We have 7,500 families with children living in temporary accommodation. So for me, housing and a secure roof over your head has to be a human right in terms of enabling people to live in the dignity that we need to afford them and that we subscribe to when we call ourselves social activists or human rights activists. I know through the work that we've done in the last 19 months since I stepped into office that we have a profound issue of embedded entrenched poverty in Europe. We've recently done some research and we've discovered that anywhere between some 3,000 people to 32,000 people living in our borough working, not only do they not get the London living wage, they don't even receive through their hard labour the basic legal requirement of the national living wage. And that is a feature of exploitation. It could relate to modern day slavery. It could relate to the inherent discrimination of the labour market, where those that are marginalised in society can be exploited. And it's these kind of issues that very much underpin and frame the approach that we're taking in Newham, in a borough that is the most diverse. We have some 242 languages spoken in this borough. We represent virtually every single country in the world. We have to stand up for the injustices that we have been reminded of all over the world. Because if we do not stand up to injustices here or overseas, we are diminished as a community and as humanity. We also need to ensure that younger generations never forget And that's why, as a council, for a number of years now, we've been marking National Holocaust Memorial Day, which takes place at the end of January, and our event in January 2020 will include an interfaith service in the morning. It will include reflections from a Holocaust survivor, but it will also include reflections from a survivor of modern day conflicts that evoke the intent behind genocide and hatred. And we need to remain vigilant in teaching and involving our young people in a understanding of history, but also on modern history that has similarly led to some extreme abuses of human rights. And we also, as citizens in this country, need to remain vigilant. We need to remain vigilant in terms of the actions of the state and the government, and we have to stay united and work in solidarity, and that's why it is so important that events like this are happening, take place in Newham, elsewhere in London, elsewhere across the country. Not least, our country is going through a significant period of conflict and uncertainty, albeit the general election has brought some certainty. Brexit will be done. But what we know is this: Brexit has fueled a hatred and a negativity towards those that look or are seen to be different. And it's a language that's been evoked in the debates over the last 3 years in this country, where the inability of governments, be it at national or local level, have led to cities and towns in the north of the country feeling decimated, where people have lost their jobs, and the easiest thing to do is to blame an immigrant or to blame someone who doesn't look like you. So the forthcoming period in this country is going to be a very tense one. Yes, there's a general election result that's been very decisive, but we have got to all ensure, in the spirit of our collective humanity, in the spirit of our solidarity, and solidarity is absolutely key, that we hold governments, both at national level and at local level, accountable for the language that they use, for the policies that they introduce, and whether or not the language in those policies cause frictions and lead to a polarisation amongst our people. Earlier this year, in May, I marked my first year in office, and I stood in front of an audience numbering some 200 people, including our 60 councillors that serve the people of Newham. And I said that we very much are celebrated and celebrate the great diversity that exists in Newham. As I mentioned earlier, we are the most diverse local borough in the whole of the country. But I don't accept that just by virtue of us being diverse, that we remain a united community. We may well do on the surface, where we bring people together through great events. But what we've got to do is put a lens to ourselves and really examine and interrogate how strong that unity is. And I remember saying, no doubt, invariably, if you begin to scratch the surface, you will begin to expose some deep-rooted anxieties or prejudice or a bias towards certain groups that are in our communities. So what we have to do here in Newham, especially because we are the diverse community in this country, is to work really hard with ourselves, as neighbours, as friends, as members of the Newham family, to confront our anxieties or our prejudices, to learn from each other, to really deepen our understanding, to build that respect, And that understanding, that respect is not about tolerance. Tolerance, actually, if you begin to unpack the word tolerance, suggests that I will just bear it. I will just tolerate you. Actually, we need to move beyond tolerance. We need to really embrace the spirit of respect, mutual understanding. There are things that we will not agree with, but if we can at least shine a light on our commonality, our common humanity, the things that make us uniquely human, our spirits, our desires for each other. We all want to live in a safe place. We all want to live in a peaceful environment. We all want everyone to have chances. So let's work together as a family to ensure that those chances aren't just afforded to one group over another. Actually, we need to lift everyone up. So I end by saying, as we commend the efforts of the organisers of this event, and my deep thanks for hosting this event and for bringing so many of you together, as we reflect on the powerful speeches by experts, by practitioners, as we commend the efforts of activists in all of our communities, and we recognise their achievements. Let's collectively promise here today, now, together, that we will remain unified, that we will work on a programme of deepening understanding, lifting our heads up, coming together, talking, breaking bread, sharing food, becoming friends, and evoking a real sense of family. Because let me give you this commitment. I may be a woman of colour, I may come from the Indian subcontinent in terms of my area or country of heritage, which is Pakistan. I may be Muslim, but I will defend the human rights of every single member of this community, regardless of which part of the world that you originate from. That I will absolutely fight to ensure that Newham becomes the best place for you, regardless of where you come from, and that every single person is afforded the best opportunities that we can open up for our residents, for our communities, but more importantly, for our future generations, because they are the ones that are going to be stepping into our shoes to lead this borough, to lead our communities, to lead the country, to be global leaders in the fight for social, environmental, economic justice, because those are the pillars of the human rights that we all want to see. And collectively, we need to renew our efforts, renew our commitments, but more importantly, we have to do it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor, particularly for your final message about needing to come together, particularly at this political moment where, I mean, a lot of disappointed people, kind of being aware that human rights are always at risk. We need to constantly uphold these values that we all kind of want to live by. Thank you. So we're going to keep you on the stage because we are about to honour our human rights defenders that we will be honoring today.
மேயர் தன்னுடைய மனமார்ந்த நன்றிகள் தன்னுடைய நீண்ட அனுபவத்தையும் பிரெக்சிட் தொடர்பான நிச்சயமற்ற பிரச்சனைகள் தொடர்பாகவும் உங்களுக்கு நீண்டதொரு உரையை எங்களுக்கு நிகழ்த்தியிருந்தார். மிக்க நன்றி. அதைத் தொடர்ந்து மனித உரிமைகள் காப்பாளர்களுக்கான ஆர்வலர்களுக்கான விருதினை வழங்க அவரை மீண்டும் நாங்கள் மேடையில் இருக்க வேண்டிய தேவையை கொடுத்து அவரை மரியாதை ஏற்றுக்கொள்கின்றோம். அதனைத் தொடர்ந்து நாங்கள் இன்று தமிழர் நடுவர் நிலையம் தமிழர் நடுவம் மனித உரிமைகள் காப்பாளர்களுக்கான இரு விருதினை என்று வழங்க இருக்கின்றது. மிக முக்கியமாக வல்லவராயன் விஜயசுந்தரம் விஜயபாலன் அவர்களுக்கும் மறைந்த அருள் தந்தை ஜேம்ஸ் பத்திநாதன் அவர்களுக்குமான இந்த விருதை வழங்க இருக்கின்றார்கள். இந்த விருதினை வழங்குவதற்கு முதல் நாங்கள் டாக்டர் ரத்னேஸ்வரன் அவர்களை அன்போடு உங்களுக்கு ஒரு சில வார்த்தைகள் கூறுமாறு அன்போடு அழைக்கின்றோம்.
Okay, so now we will be honouring 2 human rights defenders from Sri Lanka. So these people are people who have contributed significantly to the promotion of social, political and human rights. And we hope to inspire particularly the younger generation who are currently involved in fighting to protect rights and freedoms. This year TIC has decided to award Malavarayan Vijayasundaram Vijayapalan and the late Reverend Father James Patinadan. I'd like to call Dr. Ratneswaran, one of the directors of TIC, to say a few words about Malavarayan Vijayasundaram Vijayapalan.
Honorable guests and friends and ladies and gentlemen of here today. And you saw the documentary of Dave Balakrishnan. And if he's the front face of Community Information Center, the other side of the coin is Mr. Vijayapalan. I think most of you all will see him the first time. Most of you will see him the first time here. And I will give some narration about his work behind the scene for the Community Living Center. It is a great pleasure that I welcome Mr. and Mrs. Yoga Vijayapalan to receive this year's Human Rights Award for 2019. Vijayapalan has been an active member of the Community Information Center since 1984 through till 2017. And although he no longer involved in the daily activities, Mr. Vijayapalan continues to provide his experience and insight in guiding the Community Information Center in order that we maintain the founding principles of the Community Information Center. I'm grateful for the honor of introducing Mr. Vijayapalan, who has worked tirelessly throughout the decades and made a huge contribution to the Tamil-speaking people of Sri Lanka, the diaspora throughout the world, and also he worked with British Refugee Council with Mr. Malcolm Rogers, who is here today with us. Born in Ragada, the Nuvalia district, Vijay was educated at Trinity College in Kandy, followed by Sivananda Vidyalam Particular. In 1975, Mr. Vijayapalan entered Sri Lanka Law College, and after successfully completing his law degree, he was admitted to the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka in July 1979. Later that year, Mr. Vijayapalan was appointed as the head of the legal department of Ceylon Workers' Congress. He was later, in addition to his head of the legal department, he was also at the additional responsibility of the international department of the Ceylon Workers' Congress, where he worked closely with late Mr. Thandaman, the highly respected popular Tamil politician, who was famous for championing the rights of the hill country Tamils. In 1984, with his wife Yoga, he moved to Sri Lanka, to UK, due to the ongoing conflict in Sri Lanka. The same year, he was registered to practice as a solicitor in England and Wales. The same year, he also joined the Tamil Information Center. With a legal background, research experience, and journalistic skills, and document experience in documentation. He aided the Tamil Information Center and also contributed his work to the British Refugee Council along with Malcolm Rogers. Vijayabalan played a major role with our late Bharadakumar in searching, documenting, and publishing various monographs, preparing submission to the United Human Rights Council, preparing briefing statements, and editing monthly journal. We have 16 documents Mr. Vijayabalan wrote for the Tamil Information Center, and they are the seminal works. They are still the only documents published by any Tamil organization in the world. I will mention some of them. Operation of Tamils in Sri Lanka, the first edition was in 1985. Colonization of the Tamil homeland, militarization of Sri Lanka, the first edition in 1986, and it was subsequently re-edited. The Tamils of Sri Lanka, the quest for human dignity, and first edition 2001, and subsequently this was revised 2006, and also subsequently. And further in the seminal work, he documented the enduring war and health inequality in Sri Lanka in 2009, and also he documented war crimes and crimes against humanity, chronology events September 2008 till 2011. So furthermore, he wrote for the Tamil Center with Mr. Bharadakumar for submission to the Human Rights Council. At least six submissions was prepared, researching and documenting by Mr. Vijayabalan along with Mr. Bharadakumar. And also, he worked with the British Refugee Council from 1987 until 2004, when it was closed due to the lack of funding. During the period, he contributed to the Sri Lankan Monitor, along with Mr. Malcolm Rogers, with information of the ground situation in Sri Lanka, and he subsequently became the editor of the Sri Lankan Monitor. In addition to his academic and journalistic work, Mr. Vijayabalan also played a pivotal role in assisting asylum seekers in UK, Europe, North America, Canada, and Australia with asylum applications, particularly through his publication, which became the most respected evidence materials in the tribunals and courts. Lastly, Mr. Vijayabalan has been a teacher and mentor. He assisted several undergraduates and postgraduates with their dissertations and PhD theses. In summary, Vijayabalan has contributed to the Tamil people at times when they were most vulnerable and their human rights were being violated. Vijayabalan acted as a voice and witness and provided authoritative information at a time when facts and evidence were critically difficult due to